Spotlight.
This is Spotlight, and I'm your host Karthik Pulapaka. 2016 was a tough year for the Indian startups. Funding dried up, and today we find many founders running pillar to post to raise capital. Now, statistics show that they have been turning to angel investors to meet their needs. Angels have been playing a crucial role in not only funding but also in discovering innovative and disruptive startups. Today, our guest is renowned angel investor Dr. Aniruddha Malpani. Dr. Malpani is an accomplished doctor turned investor. Anybody who is remotely connected to Indian startup ecosystem must have heard of him, and he doesn't require any introductions. Dr. Malpani has invested in visionary founders and disruptive companies such as BiBox, AllizHealth and FreeSpeech. We ask him today everything about angel investing and what his vision for Indian startup scene is. Dr. Malpani, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, sir. So 2016 has been a tough year for Indian startup scene. The valuations took a beating and traditional VC firms tightened their purse strings. However, one bright spot is the participation of angels in funding rounds. In fact, according to one of the reports, the number of active angels increased from a meager 113 to 1,034 between 2014 and 2016. So I would like to ask you, Dr. Malpani, in this context, why you think there is a steep rise in the number of angels?
So I think people are always going to think of ways of being able to deploy their funds. And I think startup investing is an alternative asset class which people realize can be a great way of not only helping perhaps to get a good return on investment, but also a way of being able to contribute back, especially because you then get a chance to engage with young entrepreneurs who are optimistic, who are clever, and who perhaps can change the world for the better. I think it's still an immature system, but now more and more people are talking about it, so that if you have a friend who tells you a story about, hey, I invested in this startup, other people want to know. And the entry barrier for being an angel investor is fairly low as far as your ability to sign a check goes. I think, of course, the problem with that is perhaps it's become too easy, as a result of which you're seeing a lot of very naive investors who are going to end up burning their fingers, and that's going to hurt everyone in the ecosystem. That's one of the concerns which I have.
Right. I was actually going to ask you a little bit more about that. We see a lot of angel investors coming in, most of them without even understanding the risks involved in the process. And how important do you think that angel investors themselves do a little bit of homework before they go ahead and venture into this?
I think that's so important. I think part of it is we're seeing a bit of a fad or a bubble, call it whatever you like,
right?
Especially because events like Shark Tank, where it seems to be a very cool thing to do.
Correct.
To listen to someone who's very charismatic and sells you a great story within 10 minutes and you have people lining up to give him a check. I've burned my fingers doing stuff like that, so I know
right.
It's very tempting to want to do that, because obviously a lot of these founders are very good salesmen, but that's the road to disaster. And I think you need to be very careful about doing your due diligence, because it is hard-earned money. And I think part of the problem is no matter how much theory you spout and no matter how much you want people, until they actually burn their own fingers, they never really learn. Isn't that true?
That's absolutely right.
I think experiential learning seems to be the only way. I think part of the problem is that there are lots of angels who've not had good experiences, but the problem is that they're not willing to share the problems which they had. And I think there needs to be a lot more openness, transparency. Were you taken for a ride by other angel investors? Were you taken for a ride by the investment bankers?
Right.
Were you taken for a ride by the entrepreneur? Were you squeezed by the VC who came in next? Unless we talk about some of this stuff, I don't think the system is going to mature. But of course, when you have a great success story, you're willing to tom-tom to the rest of the world. Hey, look how smart I was.
Right.
I picked up this company and I made 100x. And no one obviously wants to talk about the other 15 companies in which you put in money and you have no idea where the entrepreneur is and where the company is doing. So the point is, it looks like a lot of fun. And I think events like Shark Tank kind of make it entertaining.
Right.
But the reality is that if you're not willing to put in the hard work, then I don't think it's a sensible asset class to invest in at all, because very illiquid. Your money gets locked up forever and ever.
Correct.
You're never sure what the company is going to do. And all angels think they're very smart because you're rich. You can sign a check. Of course, I know everything there is to know. But let's accept the fact that even VCs, who are far bigger boys, have much more experience and are professionals, are still not able to identify which startups will succeed. So why should angels think they're any smarter?
Right. It's clearly angel investment is not everybody's business. I think anybody who would like to invest as an angel, I keep hearing this, let's forget about the money that you're investing in a particular company because you don't know if you're going to get any returns or not. Do you think that's the right attitude to go in?
I think you need to be very clear in your own head about your own asset allocation and what you hope to get out of the angel investment. If you think it's a quick way to get rich without doing any work at all, just by signing a check, and the entrepreneur tells you, yeah, in 3 years I'll give you an internal rate of return of 85% because I have such a cool product, and this is how much it was valued in the US for a similar company, and therefore we're going to be able to do the same thing. You're deluding yourself, and perhaps you then deserve to lose the money if you're going to be so naive about it.
Right.
So I think there is a lot of value which a sensible angel investor can add, but unless he understands that, he needs to be very clear about his own motivations, and he needs to understand that this needs to be money which he can put in and he can afford to lose it without losing any sleep over it. That's the only amount of quantum of money you should put in the angel investing space. Anything more than that is not a good idea at all, because there is so much lack of certainty. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and no matter how good the entrepreneur is, the reality shit happens. And in a startup, it's much harder to cope with some of these ups and downs. There is a huge luck factor whether we acknowledge it or not.
Absolutely.
And the part of the problem, of course, is we take credit for all our good bets, and when things don't go well, we're always happy to blame other people.
Right.
But that's extremely immature. So I can tell you what my personal perspective is, because I think the reality is every angel investor is different. See, you can put all VCs together perhaps in one class because it's a professional class which has a particular way, business model of running. That's not true for angels. And for me, my only hope with my angel investment piece, the way I measure it, is what I call an LOI, or a learning on investment. I think the world is a fascinating place and it's changing so rapidly. And I'm a full-time practicing IVF doctor, so I'm very good in my own little niche, but I don't know much about what's happening elsewhere. And I think interacting with these clever entrepreneurs who are so passionate about what they're doing, who have a lot of domain expertise, and who have the courage to say, look, we're smarter than the existing incumbents. We can do something far better than what anyone else can do at a much lower cost. So I would say, yes, I fully understand that this money may go down to zero. This is hard-earned money. So it's not like other people's money that I'm willing to burn it.
Right.
But I think within my asset allocation space, it makes a lot of sense to me. But I think every angel investor needs to do that exercise for themselves. A big problem, quite frankly, is you're getting so many incubators, you're getting so many accelerators. So these are guys who are now looking for entrepreneurs. And obviously, if you look for entrepreneurs, you need to look for angel investors. And I think there's a lot of mis-selling going on.
Absolutely. I mean, we see almost every week we see a new incubator or an accelerator popping up. You touched upon the value that angels add. So it's not just the funding that the angels offer to the founders, but oftentimes founders who are strapped for funds, they're just ready to accept unviable terms from whoever offers the money, and I think that's clearly to their detriment. So what should founders look for in an angel investor?
So I think that's a great point, but frankly, you learn that only the hard way. See, in everyone's head, money is a fungible commodity. It really doesn't matter who gives you the money as long as the money comes in. And often for a lot of founders, beggars can't be choosers. If I don't get the money, my company is going to shut down tomorrow. So I'll take it from whoever is willing to give it, no matter how onerous the terms. But very short-sighted. And that's why we talk about dumb money and smart money. Now, obviously, every angel investor is going to feel, hey, I'm smart, and that's why you should be taking my money. But there's very little point in asking the angel investor how smart he is. You need to ask other entrepreneurs whom he has funded whether he really is a smart angel investor or not. And I will say, Most angel investors are reasonably neutral in the sense, they give the money, maybe they check with you once every 2 months, 3 months to find out what's happening. There will be good angel investors who have domain expertise, who can open doors for you, who have networks, who can help you find additional sources of funding, help you to find customers, employees who want to be actively engaged. That's your sweet spot. And if you can find an angel for that, good for you. But obviously, that's not very easy. But I think entrepreneurs need to remember that the harm which a bad angel can do is enormous. They've given you the check, but then they want to micromanage you. They want to challenge you no matter what you want to do. They have this 30,000 foot view, which is no bearing with reality at all. They have all this hot air and gyan they want to tell you, which, you can't even say anything about it. So it's extremely, extremely difficult. But like I said before, some of this stuff you only learn the hard way. And especially for me, I look upon it as a learning journey. And have I burned my fingers? Often enough. But I say that's the tuition fees which I've paid. And therefore, hopefully, that will help me to become smarter and a better angel investor the next time I invest my money.
Right. The lower the tuition fees, the better, I hope.
Like I told you before, I wish life was like that. But very frankly, no matter how many books you read, no matter how many people you talk to, and interestingly, it's often you get misled by someone whom you trust, because it's only people who trust who can cheat you. Isn't that true?
Correct.
So no matter what, and do I continue making mistakes? Yes. My only hope is that I won't repeat the old ones, but I'll make new ones. I'm fairly creative that way.
Right. So how do your portfolio companies leverage you, Dr. Malpani?
Great question. So, that's so up to each individual entrepreneur. So a lot of entrepreneurs say, Dr. Malpani, give us your check, bye-bye. What do you understand about the fintech space? And you want me to send you update every month? I will do that because that's part of my shareholder agreement. But that's it, stay an arm's length away, which is fine. See, the point is you can't trust yourself on anyone who doesn't want you. So you may think in your head that you're a great mentor, but it's a two-way street. And unless the entrepreneur thinks that you're adding value to his life, you're not. And therefore, I'm very conscious of the fact that the entrepreneur has 100 different balls to juggle. I think of myself as being in the service industry. I'm catalyzing his success so that if he thinks I can add value, then he needs to reach out to me and I will do my best to help him. But if he thinks I can't, then, perhaps most probably he's right because he knows a lot more about what he's doing. We try to help people and say, look, because we can give you a 30,000 foot view, we can help you about things like governance. We can help you things about cash flow. We can help you focus on what's important because sometimes there's so many fires to put out on a daily basis that you lose track of the big picture. So that's the value we think we bring to the table. But, it doesn't matter what I think. It really matters what the entrepreneur thinks at the end of the day.
I think the phrase that you use, catalyzing his success, probably it sums it up very nicely. And it's also very heartening to see that angel groups have been investing more and more over the years. In fact, last year, if I'm not mistaken, they invested about 1.1 billion rupees, which is almost a 62% increase from the previous year. And and oftentimes it's the angels who are co-investing together.
True.
But I think this also represents a challenge to the founders, isn't it? The general understanding is that the more number of people you have investing in, you have on the cap table, the more complex the term sheet is, and the more complex your future funding rounds are going to be. Do you believe that?
I think that's a great point. So, just like you get good entrepreneurs and bad entrepreneurs, and just like you get good angels and bad angels, you also get good angel groups and bad angel groups. So I think it's unfair perhaps to generalize because a good angel group can be brilliant. Different people have different perspectives. There's the wisdom of the crowds. Each one has a certain perspective, and together they can really help. And the advantage of a group is that if there is one person in that group whom everyone looks up to, either because he's been an entrepreneur himself who's had a successful exit, or he understands a lot about the domain, or he believes in the founder and can vouch for him, then a lot of other angels will be quite happy to piggyback. And that's a great way of learning without spending too much money. And it's a great way of learning from guys who are much more mature than you in the ecosystem. What do they look for? How do they identify a good founder? What do they want in a term sheet? And ideally, what should happen is you should have one spokesperson in that angel group who then represents all the other angels in that group so that it makes the founder's life a little bit easier. So that it's good for him to know that there is a group of 20 people whose interests are aligned with mine, whom I can reach out to if and when I need them. But as far as reporting on a regular basis, there is this one face whom I need to report to. And I think that can help to reduce a lot of friction, because this one person is then the interface between the founder and the rest of the angel investors. So if they have questions, they can reach out to that guy and not reach out to the founder every single time, because that drives founders crazy. Because 5 different angels have 5 different perspectives. They're all pulling in different directions, and they're all equally clueless sometimes. And that's true for me as well.
Right. So, my next question is about the ownership that the angels usually demand when they invest in a very early stage startup. It's understandable that the risk is phenomenal at that stage. In the US, we've seen that the mean angel round ownership is around 20%. But is that a realistic number in Indian context also?
Yes, I think, and typically that's what we try to aim for. And the reason, quite frankly, is that the US startup ecosystem is so much more mature than the Indian system,
Right.
that all of us use the US system as a model, and we're learning, and we'll have to adopt some of the good practices. We'll have to adapt some of the other ones as well. But I think at the end of the day, the angel also wants to say, do I have a significant chunk of the company to make it worth my risk of putting my money inside? I don't think it's fair to generalize, because as you know, every startup is different. Some of them are cash flow positive already by the time they're looking for additional funding. Some is just an idea which is on a piece of paper. So, it's very individual. So I wouldn't want to say that, this is the right number or not. And ultimately, as with everything else in the startup ecosystem, everything is negotiable. There is no one standard answer. You cannot have a one size fits all.
Right. What is your take on the ESOPs, and how much attention do founders must pay at the very beginning of their entrepreneurial journey about those things?
Oh, absolutely. We would strongly recommend, in fact, lots of term sheets make it compulsory that you should have at least 10% as ESOP. Some people will even ask for more. And I think, again, when you understand why ESOPs are important and you explain to the founder why they're important, I think they get it. The reality is that founders can be quite financially naive, and that's exactly the way it should be. And therefore, you have to spend a lot of time cultivating trust and explaining to them that you're trying to create a win-win situation, that we as angel investors succeed only when the founder succeeds. Ultimately, he has other sources of money, family, friends, other fools, other angel investors, VCs, customers, whatever else. But angels can't survive if you don't have entrepreneurs. So we try to explain to him why we're doing what we're doing, but only if we are both on the same page. And I think all the time we think of entrepreneurs as selling to investors or pitching to investors, but the reality is that investors are selling their services to entrepreneurs as well.
Right.
And this is especially true in the Silicon Valley ecosystem, where they're flush with liquidity, and money is just a commodity.
Correct.
That's not true in India as well. So as yet, I would say, because there's still lots of entrepreneurs chasing few investors, but I'm sure over time that will change as well.
So when we talked last time, Dr. Malpani, you told me that visionary founders as one of the key factors in deciding whether you invest in that company, in a particular company or not. What are some of the other factors you look for before investing?
So, the only data point you really have when you look at a startup is whatever projections he chooses to give you and the founder. And we all understand that projections are flawed.
Right.
And therefore, what we're really looking for is that, can we find a founder whom I can fall in love with? Let me explain what I'm saying is that I would like to find a founder that even if the money which I invested in this startup goes down the drain and the startup tanks, and he wants to start a second company, will I still be willing to fund him the second time around? And that's the kind of person you want, someone who drives you away, what, his ability, what he thinks about, how much he thinks about it. It's very intangible, quite frankly. So much of it is chemistry. And I think people forget that a lot of these are very personal relationships. And sometimes the chemistry is just right, sometimes it's not. And I think entrepreneurs should also understand that just because 10 angel investors say no to you doesn't mean anything. You're just not right for them. But there will be an 11th and a 12th perhaps who will fall in love with you and will see the value in what you're saying. I think part of the problem is that entrepreneurs feel very vulnerable. And they feel that if an angel investor says no to them, that means there's something wrong with them, or there's something wrong with the company. And none of that is true. Angels aren't omniscient. We also learning on the job itself. We make lots of mistakes. And ultimately, you want to create a partnership where everyone stands to benefit. So, we look at all these things, but at the end of the day, like it or not, it's all intuition, gut feel, whatever else. For me, one very helpful thing is, and this is my sweet spot, again, it doesn't apply across the board, is does he have paying customers? For me, that's a major validation that he's found product market fit. And for me, my role as an angel investor is then to help him to scale up once he's reached that point. But, there are lots of different kinds of angels, and there'll be lots of people who will be happy to back just an idea perhaps, or just someone whom they know for many, many years, who they feel can pull it off.
That's right. The key is basically not to give up. Just keep going. Even though you get a lot of blowback from few investors, it doesn't mean that your idea is wrong.
I think that's a difficult thing because sometimes you require grit, but sometimes you also need to know when you're breaking your head against a brick wall.
Right.
And sometimes quitting is the smarter part of this thing. Again, I don't ever want to generalize.
Right.
I think each individual situation is so different. And really, why do you think someone else has all the answers? The answers are all within you. You need to find them for yourself.
Right. So over the years, Dr. Malpani, you've invested in visionary founders such as that of FreeSpeech and innovative companies such as BiBox. So could you give us some idea about how those investments came about?
So this was early days. So interestingly, when I first started, I had no clue about angel investing. So I was a part of Mumbai Angels network. And I learned a lot as a result of the network because there are lots of very, very smart people who've done a lot more stuff. I didn't know what a term sheet was. I didn't understand what, any of these rights were, tag along rights, drag along rights. So I learned on the job. And the group itself was very, very helpful because there were lots of other people and they asked such great questions to the entrepreneurs. So both of these were investments I made through Mumbai Angels. And, the entrepreneurs are so bright. They're already 5 steps ahead of me. Thought about things, are willing to push back, willing to have intelligent discussions about what they're doing. So I think it's been a great journey. I don't have any success stories as yet, so I always tell people, don't judge me by, how much money have you made? And the answer is 0. But I think it's not fair to judge by outcomes. I think as far as the process is okay, and as long as I'm being honest to myself,
right,
and to the entrepreneur, I think I'm fine, no matter what the final outcome. It's too early really to answer any of these questions. The only person I'm answerable to is my wife, because half of it is her money. So as long as she doesn't complain, I'm fine.
Right. I think that's a key point there.
True.
You mentioned that some startup founders, they're not afraid to push back.
Yes.
But on the flip side, investors are also frustrated when a founder ignores feedback and the inputs. Isn't that right?
That's a sore point, Karthik. So what you're saying is right. And the one thing which I hate is that they only come back to you after they've run out of money and they want to raise the next round.
Right.
And I think part of the problem is that in one sense you're being disrespectful. You're not treating the investor as a true partner. You said, paisa le liya, okay, bye-bye. Now I will manage for myself.
Right.
And I think that's something which comes back to haunt the entrepreneur as well. See, don't forget one thing. When you think about a startup, the entrepreneur has so much more at stake than what I do. For me, that's one of my investee companies. I have a portfolio. Even if it goes down the tube, I'll still live. I'll still survive. For the entrepreneur, that's going to be a big chunk of his life. Forget about all the opportunity costs and everything else. That's the dream which he wants to bring to reality, fruition. And there's a huge family expense when you become an entrepreneur. You're kind of so single-minded that your spouse, your kids, they all bear the brunt of the fact that, you're so passionate about what you're doing. So that's a huge price to pay. And I think that's why you need to understand that you cannot treat your investors as a commodity who will only give you money when you want it. That's just not the way things work. You need to build buckets of goodwill. And for me, the biggest problem is that people don't communicate. And I say, look, over-communicate. If your term sheet asks for a report once every 3 months, send it once a month. What difference does it make to you? This is stuff you need to be on knowing and tracking anyway. Share it with your investors.
Right.
Then they say, but suppose it's bad news. I said, better that you tell me the bad news now
Done.
rather than after you've run out of money and then you're going to scrabble, and then what am I going to do for you?
Correct.
I will refuse to help you because I'm pissed off that you didn't bother to engage with me, and I will let you die. I will abandon you because you abandoned me.
Right.
Whereas on the other hand, you share the problems. I also understand you're not Superman. I understand that things can go wrong, but let's try to solve it together. And even if things do go wrong, at least I will have been a part of the journey. But I'll tell you one thing. There are so many horror stories in the startup ecosystem in India about how much undue advantage investors have taken of naive entrepreneurs that it's very hard to establish trust. And every entrepreneur is going to say, why do I think you're going to be any different from any other angel investor, Dr. Malpani?
Right.
I think all you guys are crooks. And, how can I argue with that? It's a bit like a doctor-patient relationship. Once a patient has burned their fingers with one bad doctor, they will never trust another doctor, no matter how good that doctor is.
Yep, that's true. This is Spotlight, and I'm your host, Karthik Palapaka. My guest today is renowned doctor and angel investor, Dr. Aniruddha Malpani. Doctor, before I switch to asking further questions, I want to bring out this point that has been in the back of my mind for quite some time. I think that VCs and angels, they both are complementary to each other, and they both play key roles at different stages of a company. So let's talk a little bit about partnering with venture capitals. Earlier on, I gave you the statistics on how the angel investors have grown in number. In fact, VCs also have grown in number between 2014 and 2016. As of last time I checked, it's about 767 active VCs in the country. So when there are so many VCs, how do you advise your portfolio companies to approach which VC and at what stage should they approach that particular VC?
I think, again, that's a great question, but VCs also come in all shapes and sizes. So some VCs will have investments only in a particular domain. And this is really homework which the entrepreneur has to do. And all we can say is that, when you're going ahead and pitching, we can help you refine your pitch. We can help you look at life through the VC's lens that increases your odds. We can perhaps refer you to investment bankers. And we're happy to participate in the next round as well, which is a great source of validation for the incoming investor and the VC that the existing angels are happy, because these are valuable signaling mechanisms. Whereas on the other hand, if your existing investors are not willing to give you any more money, every VC will treat that as a red flag potentially. So again, in that ecosystem, just like you have good angels, bad angels, good entrepreneurs, bad entrepreneurs, you have good VCs and bad VCs as well. So it's so individualistic, and it really depends. I think part of the problem, of course, is we think that VCs have these boatloads of cash and they're happy to sign checks. But VCs have their own constraints as well. Where in the life cycle of their fundraise are they running out of money? Are they deploying more money? Complicated things. And therefore, bottom line is the entrepreneur has to do his due diligence. He has to, like I tell people, check lots of things, kiss a lot of frogs to find the right VC for himself. But the point is, he will get potentially smarter every time he pitches. And the more often he pitches, the better he will get at it.
Right. Dr. Malpani, let me turn to you. How you journeyed from being a successful and leading doctor to a successful and leading angel. It's very fascinating and one of a kind. How did this happen?
So, I won't call myself a successful angel. Just because I sign checks doesn't make me a successful angel. I don't think that's my metric of success. So I think we'll have this conversation about 7 years from now, when I'll have a slightly longer track record, and then we can see whether I was successful or not. But there are 2 or 3 reasons I would like to point out. In fact, one of my patients said, doctors, you're an IVF doctor and you help, patients like me who are infertile to start a family. And it's great that you're helping entrepreneurs to start companies as well. So I think maybe that's the common denominator. But more importantly, I think, quite frankly, as you get a little bit older, you get a little cynical, you get a little skeptical about how the world is going to the dogs. And doctors love complaining about how no one respects doctors anymore and how they're getting squeezed by patients and Dr. Google and hospitals and the government, which, and doctors get beaten up by patients all the time.
Right.
Whereas, and obviously some of that rubs off onto you when you become pessimistic. Whereas when you engage with young, passionate entrepreneurs who have hopes of a brighter tomorrow and are willing to actually invest their life, in making that come true, some of that rubs off onto you as well.
Right.
And as someone said, that ultimately you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you hang out with young, optimistic people, hopefully, I won't become young necessarily, but hopefully I'll become a little more optimistic. That's one reason. The other set of reasons is a little more personal. I have 2 daughters. Neither of them are doctors. So one is in Stanford right now. She's doing her MBA at the GSB.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I need to be able to talk her language. I need her to be able to respect me that, daddy's not an old fuddy-duddy doctor who doesn't understand what I'm doing. So part of it has also got to do with that.
Fascinating. So, I know firsthand actually, your commitment to the clinic, and you always say patients come first.
Yes.
Isn't it difficult for you to manage both of your day jobs, being an angel investor and a doctor?
Okay, so 3 or 4 things there. One is that because I'm an IVF specialist, there aren't really any emergencies. Everything is planned and scheduled.
Mm.
And the second is I work with my wife, so she's the one who really does all the hard work in the IVF clinic. So that just makes my life a lot easier. And even as far as the angel goes, I actually do my investing through a team. I have a family office.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you quite correctly point out, really, how much do I understand in this space? And how much energy can I devote? So therefore, the way I look at it is if I have gaps, I need to fill in those gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do by investing through a family office. And that's made a world of a difference as far as I'm concerned. So it's really been a very enjoyable journey so far, so that it allows me to put my patients first, obviously, because that's still my first responsibility. But I don't need to neglect the entrepreneurs because there is a team who will handle that. And quite frankly, they do a much better job than I do. So lots of entrepreneurs are quite happy to talk to them rather than to me.
Dr. Malpani, if you're gazing into a crystal ball, how do you see the future of Indian startup scene?
I'm very, very optimistic. I think a lot of people are realizing that the cushy job of the past, whether it was a government job or you work for a company like Infosys or TCS, those days have gone.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that certainty and that surety. The only way to create certainty is by creating your own jobs for yourself. And I think we have enough successful role models. The media is also doing an extremely good job of pitching entrepreneurs as heroes.
Right.
So therefore now there is alternative role models available for young students. And there is now that courage they have to be able to step out for themselves. Colleges are encouraging this as well. Money is coming in because there are angel investors who are willing to put in the money. And I'll tell you one thing, my sweet spot is actually for social investment, because I think, things like education or things like healthcare, because I think they can have a huge impact.
Right.
I think, because angel investors like me are willing to give them financial capital, they no longer need to depend on grants or on philanthropy. So that's great. But I actually think my financial ROI on these social impact companies is going to be better for 2 reasons. One is because they have a social impact. And that actually gives them an edge because, a lot of customers have a soft corner for anyone who's doing something socially responsible. And they're actually willing to pay a premium for stuff like that. And equally importantly, I think they have a lot of human capital, so that the kind of employees which these companies attract, social entrepreneurs get employees of a particularly different breed altogether, who will not switch jobs just because someone pays them 10% more.
Right.
So that's what my ideal this thing would be. Having said that, I don't want to do anything with any preconceived notions. I have a thesis in my head, but do I break my rules all the time?
Right. But do you think we're at that point where we can actually challenge the US or Israel as the next tech startup mecca?
Actually, we must understand that Indian entrepreneurs have an edge because the domestic market you have in India is humongous. And no Silicon Valley VC really wants to address the Indian market. But Indian entrepreneurs can not only address the global market because, that's a level playing field if you're willing to do stuff on the cloud. But they also have the edge because they understand the local Indian market. So I think the US ecosystem and the Israel ecosystem is more evolved, it's more mature, but I think we can catch up fairly quickly. I'm not really worried about that at all.
So, Doctor, our listeners are predominantly founders and what we call innovators. If they were to reach out to you, how can they do so?
Okay, so my email is info@dr.malpani.com. We have a website called www.malpaniventures.com. And we try to be as transparent. We explain to founders, look, your time is precious. Please make sure that there is a good fit before approaching us. You need to know what our sweet spot is because we obviously can't be right for everyone. And in fact, the question we ask them is, are we the right funders for you? And if you're not, then really you should not be wasting your time approaching us. You need to be looking for the person who's right for you. We're trying to do two or three things. One is we're trying to be open and transparent so that they know exactly what we bring to the table. We're also trying to encourage them to be equally open and transparent. And we're trying to bridge this gap between the entrepreneur and the investor by helping both to be a little more empathetic and to see the world through each other's eyes, because that's the only way you can potentially create a win-win situation.
Dr. Malpani, I wish I could go on listening to you and asking you more questions, but between working with your portfolio companies, meeting new founders, and taking care of your patients, you have very little time, I know that. And on behalf of all of our listeners and us at the Hacker State, we thank you very much for your time. Many thanks.
No, thank you so much, Karthik. I really enjoyed myself. These are very thoughtful questions, and it's always a good idea for me to step back and look at the bigger picture, and you've helped me to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.